The ship was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from peace, but the kind that comes from people holding their breath. Lieutenant Commander Aaron Briggs stood near the back wall of the meeting chamber aboard the diplomatic vessel GES Frontier and watched the aliens walk in. He had seen photos of the Valhari before. Photos did not do them justice. They were tall, nearly 3 meters, with thick, ridged plates of bone running down their spines and across their shoulders. Their eyes were amber and flat, like coins pressed into the sides of their heads. They moved slowly, as if they had never been in a hurry in their lives and never intended to start. There were 9 of them. They came in without speaking, took their seats on the far side of the long oval table, and looked at the humans the way a man looks at a crack in a sidewalk. Not with anger. Not even with curiosity. Just a flat, automatic assessment that ended quickly. Ambassador Dana Holt sat at the head of the human delegation. She was 53 years old, had silver hair pulled back tight, and had spent the better part of her adult life in rooms where people hated each other. She had negotiated ceasefires in 3 separate wars on Earth. She was not easily rattled. But Aaron watched her fold her hands together on the table very carefully, and he knew that meant she was working hard at staying still. The Valhari delegate introduced himself as Keth Farrell. His translator unit rendered his voice into flat, accented English, not because he respected the language, Aaron suspected, but because it was easier than making the humans learn Valhari in a week. Keth Farrell opened the meeting by explaining, without any particular emotion, that the Galactic Conclave had reviewed humanity's application for membership. The Conclave was old. 4,000 years old, by their own count. It had 17 member species. It governed trade, territory, and conflict across a region of space so large that Aaron's brain quietly refused to hold the number. Humanity had been traveling between star systems for 40 years. In Conclave terms, humans were something between a new pet and an interesting stain. Keth Farrell announced that humanity had been granted observer status. Dana asked what that meant in practical terms. Keth Farrell explained. Observer status was the lowest category the Conclave offered. It was designed for species that showed signs of developing space travel but had not yet demonstrated the stability or the strength required for full membership. Observers could attend certain sessions. They could not vote. They could not hold territory. They could not call on Conclave protection. They were, in simple language, allowed to watch. Dana nodded. She said she understood and asked what path existed toward full membership. What came next was something Aaron would think about for years afterward. Keth Farrell turned to one of his aides, who handed him a thin data tablet. He held it up and read from it in a tone that a teacher might use to explain something very basic to a very slow student. He reviewed humanity's biology. Average lifespan of 70 to 80 years. Short, he said, by any measure. No natural armor. No natural weapons of any real consequence. A reproductive rate that was functional, but unremarkable. A species with no venom, no claws, no hide capable of resisting even basic environmental hazards. Soft-skinned. Fragile-boned in comparison to most species that had achieved space travel. One of the other Valhari in the room made a sound that the translator did not convert. But it was clear enough. It was laughter. Another Valhari picked up the standard-issue combat knife that had been placed on the table as part of the human delegation's formal display of cultural items. He turned it over once, examined the blade, and then bent it, slowly, with one hand, using no particular effort, until the tip touched the handle. He set it back down on the table. He did not look mean about it. That was the worst part. He looked bored. Keth Farrell continued. He acknowledged that humans had a history of conflict. He said that humans were, he supposed, reasonably skilled at harming one another, which was a trait common among young species that had not yet matured. He said that humanity's primary qualification for observer status was its apparent drive and the infrastructure it had built, not any natural capability that would make it useful to the Conclave. Aaron kept his face still. He was good at that. But he was writing down every word in his head, filing it away somewhere cold and permanent. Dana Holt reached forward, picked up the bent knife, and set it in her jacket pocket. She said thank you for the review. Her voice was level and professional. If she was angry, and Aaron knew she was, it lived somewhere behind her eyes, invisible. The meeting moved on to trade boundaries, territorial markers, and the standard documentation that came with observer status. Most of it was administrative. Aaron stopped listening to the details and started paying attention to the room instead. He watched how the Valhari moved and how they looked at things. He watched which of them leaned in when Dana spoke and which of them had already stopped paying attention. He watched Keth Varel the most. Near the end of the session, Aaron asked a question. He asked it simply, as if he was just curious, just filling in background information about the region listed on the territorial map as Sector 9. It was marked in a dull red on the display, with no further explanation, cordoned off from any access or travel. The room shifted slightly. It was subtle, but Aaron caught it. Two of the Velhari exchanged a look. Keth Varel said that Sector 9 was a quarantine zone. It was not open to any species. Not for trade, not for exploration, not for any reason. Aaron asked why. Keth Varel looked at him for a moment. Then he said one word. Varric. Aaron waited for more. Nothing came. He asked what the Varric were. Keth Varel studied him with those flat amber eyes. Then he said, in a tone that was almost gentle, that it did not matter what they were. What mattered was that no species entered Sector 9. That was the rule. That was the only rule about Sector 9 that anyone who understood anything would ever need. The session ended. The Velhari rose and left without ceremony. Aaron and Dana walked back through the corridor toward the human section of the ship. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The hum of the ship's engine filled the silence between them. Dana reached into her pocket and took out the bent knife. She looked at it for a moment. Then she put it back. Aaron glanced at her and said quietly that he thought it had gone about as well as they expected. Dana said that it had gone exactly as she expected. She said that she had expected them to underestimate humanity the same way every bully she had ever met underestimated the person they were sitting across from. She said she was not worried about that. Aaron asked what she was worried about. She said she was worried about the word Varric, and the fact that when he asked what it meant, not a single alien in that room had smiled. Aaron thought about that for the rest of the night. He pulled up the star charts and looked at Sector 9 for a long time, that wide, dark, cordoned-off patch of space with its red border and its empty label. One word.
No explanation.
And the most powerful species in the known galaxy had gone very quiet the moment it was spoken. He saved the charts, closed his screen, and sat in the dark for a while, thinking about what kind of thing could make the Velhari stop laughing. 6 months after the summit, the GES Ashford crossed the border into Sector 9. It was not an accident. Captain Kyle Mercer had filed the mission as a deep-range survey of uncharted energy readings near the quarantine line. That part was true. The energy readings were real, strange pulses that didn't match anything in any known catalogue, repeating on an irregular cycle that Dr. Paige Ellison had been obsessing over for 3 weeks straight. What Kyle did not file, and what no one at Earth Command had technically approved, was the part where he intended to follow those readings past the boundary marker and into the red zone. He told his crew the truth, at least. He called them together in the common bay and laid it out plain. He said that the conclave had drawn a line and told humanity not to cross it without ever explaining why. He said that in his experience, when someone powerful told you to stay out of a room without telling you what was inside, there were 2 kinds of people, the kind who stayed out and the kind who eventually opened the door. He said he was the second kind, and anyone who wanted to transfer off the ship before they crossed the line was welcome to say so. Nobody transferred. Corporal Dante Cruz leaned against the back wall with his arms crossed and said he had grown up hunting elk in Montana and had spent the last 8 years clearing alien wreckage sites for Earth's military. He said he was not afraid of empty space. He said that before they crossed. The Ashford passed the quarantine marker at 0400 ship time. For the first 6 hours, nothing happened. The ship moved deeper into Sector 9, tracking the energy pulses, and everything was quiet. The stars looked the same as they did everywhere else. The readings were odd but not alarming. Paige recorded everything and barely slept, moving between her instruments with coffee going cold in her hand. Then something hit the hull. The first impact came from below, a sound that was less like a collision and more like something dragging. Slow and deliberate. Kyle was on the bridge when it happened, and he felt it through the floor before he heard it through the ship. He told the crew to go to alert status and check the exterior cameras. The exterior cameras showed nothing. The second impact was harder. It buckled a section of the outer plating on the starboard side and the pressure alarm started screaming. One of the junior engineers ran to the damage station and reported that something had punched through the outer hull layer as if it were aluminum foil. Then they saw it on the thermal scanner. It was enormous. That was the first thing. The sheer size of it registered before anything else made sense. The thermal image showed a mass roughly 20 meters from end to end, dense and irregular, moving with a slow coiling motion that didn't match anything mechanical. It had no obvious shape at first. Then it moved into the light of the ship's exterior floodlamps and everyone on the bridge went silent. It looked, at first, like something between a crustacean and a very large predatory fish. It had a wide, flat head with a secondary jaw structure that opened sideways. Its body was covered in overlapping plates, dark grey, almost black, that reflected almost no light. Its limbs, of which there were 6, ended not in fingers but in curved hooks the length of a grown man's forearm, and those hooks were currently braced against the outer hull of the Ashford while the creature worked at the breach it had already started. It was a juvenile. Page figured that out later, from the size ratios in the data. At the time, nobody on the bridge was thinking about its age. Kyle ordered full thrust. The ship lurched forward and the creature held on. It held on easily, without any apparent effort, and kept working at the hull. The breach opened wider. The ship's internal barriers sealed the affected corridor, but the sound of the thing tearing through the outer shell was audible throughout the entire vessel, a long, rhythmic grinding that seemed almost patient. Dante moved fast. He grabbed the emergency locker in the corridor outside the engine bay and pulled out 2 high-output flare canisters, the kind used for distress signaling in open space. He got to the nearest external hatch that still had hull integrity, cracked the seal just enough to fire both canisters point-blank at the creature through the gap. The light hit it and the creature recoiled. Not a little. Violently. It released the hull and curled away from the light as if it had been burned, all 6 limbs pulling inward, the massive head turning away at speed. It didn't go far, maybe 30 meters off, but it stopped its attack. It hung there in the dark beyond the light, and on the thermal scanner it pulsed with heat from what Page would later identify as an acute stress response. Carl didn't wait to see if it would come back. He pushed the Ashford to full emergency burn and got them out of Sector 9 in 11 minutes. They lost 3 crew members. 1 in the initial breach. 2 in the corridor when the outer barrier failed before the inner one sealed. Their names were Owen Garza, Cody Flint, and Ray Salter. Kyle wrote their names in the ship log himself and sat with that for a long time after the ship was clear. Paige worked through the night on the data she had captured. Her hands were shaking for the first 2 hours, but she kept working. By morning, she had a partial biological profile, incomplete, but real. Movement patterns, thermal output, the stress response to light, the structural details of the secondary jaw, the composition of the hull scoring left by the creature's hooks. She brought it all to Kyle and said that whatever that thing was, it had never been studied before. Not properly. Not by anyone who survived long enough to write it down. Kyle looked at the data for a long time. Then he sent the full report to Earth Command and to Ambassador Dana Holt directly. He marked it urgent. He marked it classified. And in the notes field, in plain language, he wrote that the Conclave hadn't quarantined Sector 9 because the Varric were dangerous in the way a storm is dangerous, something you avoid and wait out. He wrote that they had quarantined it because the Varric were dangerous the way a wall is dangerous when you're driving toward it at full speed with no brakes. That kind of dangerous didn't go away. It waited. He also wrote that the creature had reacted to light. That it had retreated. That for just a moment, before it pulled back into the dark, he had seen it hesitate, and he did not think a truly unstoppable predator hesitated, not even once. He sent the report and went to find Dante Cruz, who was sitting in the cargo bay cleaning the flare canisters in silence. Kyle sat down beside him and said that Cruz had saved the ship. Dante said he hadn't done anything special. He said back home, when something was coming at you in the dark, you made a light. He said that was just what you did. Kyle said maybe. But he said that 3,000 years of Conclave history didn't have a single record of a Varric retreating from anything. Dante turned the empty canister over in his hands and looked at it. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said that he supposed the Varric had never met anyone who grew up in Montana. Neither of them laughed. But something shifted in the air between them, something small and specific, the beginning of a thought that neither of them had words for yet. The thought that the Varric was not a wall after all. That it was, underneath all that armor and darkness and violence, a creature. And creatures, in Kyle Mercer's experience, had always had a weakness. You just had to be willing to bleed a little before you found it. The research station above Titan was not a comfortable place to work. It was cold, cramped, and smelled permanently of recycled air and machine grease. The corridors were narrow. The equipment was always either running too hot or refusing to start. The coffee was terrible. Nobody who worked there complained about any of it, because they were too busy. Dr. Page Ellison had been running on 4 hours of sleep a night for so long that she had stopped noticing. She stood at her main display wall on a Tuesday morning, ship time, not that it mattered, and looked at the three-dimensional model of a Varric that her team had spent the last 4 months building from the data the HFY had captured. It was not a complete model. There were gaps. But it was real, and it was more than anyone had ever had before. Colonel Nina Carr stood beside her and looked at it the same way she looked at everything, without expression, missing nothing. Nina was former Special Operations. Before she took command of Earth's newly formed Varric Response Division, she had spent 12 years doing work that the public record described in very general terms. She was not tall, but she took up space in a way that tall people often didn't. She spoke in short, direct sentences and never said anything twice. She had read every page of Page research files and had shown up at the Titan station 3 weeks after the Ashford incident with a team of 12 and a mandate that came directly from Earth Command. She said that humanity needed to know if the Varric could be killed. Page said she didn't know yet. Nina said that was fine. She said that was what they were here to find out. Lieutenant Commander Aaron Briggs arrived at the station 2 weeks later, assigned as the liaison between the military and science teams. He had requested the post. He told his commanding officer that he had personal knowledge of the diplomatic situation and could serve as useful context for the research. That was true. It was also true that since the night he had sat in the dark looking at the star charts of Sector 9, he had not been able to think about much else. The work was slow and difficult and occasionally dangerous even in a laboratory context. 3 prototype test rigs were destroyed in the first month alone, one by an energy feedback that nobody had predicted, one by a miscalibrated pressure chamber, and one for reasons that the team's lead engineer, a quiet man named Pete Holloway, described only as a series of decisions I will not be repeating. Nobody was killed in any of these failures, which Page considered a minor miracle and Nina considered acceptable results. But the research moved forward. What they learned, piece by piece, was remarkable, not because the Varric were invincible, but because they almost were, and the distance between almost and actually was very specific. The first weakness they confirmed was radiation sensitivity. A narrow band of ultraviolet radiation, not broad spectrum, not visible light, but a specific wavelength that fell between standard UVB and UVC, triggered a strong aversion response in the Varric's nervous system. On their homeworld, this wavelength was associated with a particular type of atmospheric storm that was, apparently, the one environmental condition on that planet dangerous enough to drive even the Varric into shelter. The flare canisters Dante Cruz had used on the Ashford had hit close enough to this wavelength by accident. A purpose-built emitter would hit it exactly. The second weakness came from studying the creature's attack behavior. The Varric used a charge attack, a full force, direct lunge, when it closed on prey. It was devastating. In the half-second after the charge made contact, the creature experienced a brief window of positional adjustment, resetting its limbs for grip and follow-through. In that window, approximately 0.4 of a second, its response time dropped significantly. It was not blind. It was not helpless. But it was slower, and slower was exploitable. The third weakness was structural. The Varric's plating was extraordinary, dense enough to resist standard kinetic rounds, resistant to most energy weapons at normal output levels. But the plating was not uniform. There was a gap, an articulation point where the secondary jaw connected to the lower skull structure, where the plating did not fully overlap. The gap was not large. It was, Page noted in her report, approximately the width of a human hand. But the tissue beneath it was unarmored, and the nerve cluster directly underneath that gap was, by her analysis, functionally the same as a brainstem. The right strike, in the right place, at the right moment, would kill a Varric. Nina looked at that finding for a long time. Then she asked how close you had to be to make that strike. Page told her. Nina said nothing for a moment. Then she said that was going to require a very specific type of person. Aaron watched this exchange and thought of Dante Cruz cleaning flare canisters in the cargo bay of the Ashford. The weapon's design took another 3 months. Nina drove it relentlessly, sleeping less than anyone except Page. The primary tool that emerged was what Pete Holloway called, with typical understatement, the lance, a shape-charged delivery rod, roughly the length of a human arm, designed to be driven into a target at close range and detonated on a half-second delay. It was, in practical terms, a weapon that required the person using it to be close enough to smell the creature they were killing. Nobody said this was ideal. They built it anyway. The UV emitters were designed as ship-mounted arrays that could pulse in coordinated sequences, driving a Varric pack in a specific direction. Behavioral modeling, built by a young analyst on Page's team named Clara Webb, who had a background in wildlife population dynamics, mapped out how a pack would respond to sustained light pressure. The models were not perfect. Clara was the first to say so. But they were good enough to form the skeleton of a plan. Then, in the middle of all this, the conclave arrived uninvited. A Velhari envoy ship docked at the Titan station with no advance notice. The envoy, not Keth Farrell, but a younger delegate whose name translated roughly as Velsorin, came aboard and asked, with practiced politeness, what exactly humanity was doing. Aaron met with him. He showed him a summary of the research. He did not show him the weapons designs. Velsorin's plating changed color slightly, the Velhari version of going pale. He looked at the biological data, at the structural vulnerability diagram, at the behavioral models. He looked at it all and then he told Aaron, in a voice that was trying very hard to be calm, that humanity needed to stop. He said that the Varric were not a problem to be solved. He said that what humanity was doing would provoke them, would draw their attention, would end in catastrophe. Aaron said that a Varric incursion had just destroyed a conclave outpost near the Sector 9 border. He said the conclave had sent no military response. He asked Velsorin what the conclave's plan was. Exactly. Velsorin did not answer that question. Aaron thanked him for his concern and showed him out. He went back to the lab and told Paige and Nina what had happened. Nina said that was fine. She said they didn't need the conclave's permission. She said they were close and that close was the only thing that mattered right now. Aaron sat down at his desk that night and wrote one line in his personal log. He wrote, "They've already surrendered to it." Then he closed the log, looked out the small viewport at the dark curve of Saturn's rings below the station, and thought about a bent knife sitting in a jacket pocket. He thought about Dana Holt's face in that meeting chamber when the Velhari delegate had dropped it on the table. He thought about how she had picked it up without a word. He thought that sometimes the most important thing a person could do was simply refuse to put the knife down. He went to bed. In the morning, the work continued. Every person on the mission was a volunteer. Nina Carr had made that clear from the beginning. She had stood in front of the assembled crew of all 4 ships and told them the casualty projections. Not a range, not an estimate, but a direct number that her planning team had calculated based on everything they knew. She said that number out loud without flinching. She said that if anyone wanted to step off the mission, there would be no record of it and no judgment attached to their name. She gave them an hour. Nobody left. Corporal Dante Cruz was the first to re-sign his assignment form. He didn't make a speech about it. He just walked up, signed his name, and went back to checking his equipment. The fleet entered Sector 9 on a Wednesday. 4 ships, the GES Cradle, which was Nina's command vessel, and 3 Hunter-class ships that Pete Holloway's team had spent the last 2 months converting into mobile weapon platforms. The UV arrays were mounted on all 4 ships. The Lancers were distributed to the ground team. The behavioral models were loaded into every navigation system. Captain Kyle Mercer commanded one of the Hunter ships. He had not been required to come back. He had insisted. For the first 2 hours, Sector 9 looked exactly as it had when the Ashford had crossed into it, quiet, dark, and very large. The energy readings that had first drawn Page's attention were stronger here, pulsing in their strange irregular rhythm. Nobody knew exactly what caused them. Nobody had time to find out. The thermal scanners picked up the pack at hour 3. 9 of them. 7 adults and 2 that Clara Webb's models tagged as subadults, not juveniles, but not fully grown. They were moving in a loose cluster about 40 kilometers ahead, apparently unaware of the fleet. Nina ordered the ships to cut their primary drives and drift, running silent. She gave the pack another 30 minutes to move into the projected kill zone. They moved into it in 22. Nina gave the order. All 4 ships lit their UV arrays at full power simultaneously. The effect on the pack was immediate and dramatic. The 9 Varric scattered, not randomly, but in the specific pattern that Clara's models had predicted, the majority of them driving away from the light source and pulling toward the gravitational low point of a dead moon 200 kilometers to the port side. The arrays tracked them, pushing the pressure, herding the pack the way a sheepdog moves sheep, not with aggression, but with steady, patient presence. It was working. Then one of the Hunter ships broke formation. Later, the investigation would determine that the pilot, a young officer named Tom Garrett, had suffered a calibration error on his navigation array that sent his ship drifting into the path of the 2 subadults. The ship had tried to correct, which brought it closer. The subadults, pushed and frightened by the UV arrays, had turned on the nearest available target. The ship went dark in 40 seconds. Nina watched it on the tactical display and said nothing. Then she said, in a very flat voice, to hold formation and maintain array pressure. She said that stopping now would mean Tom Garrett died for nothing. The remaining 3 ships held. The pack, now down to 7 after the 2 subadults circled back towards Sector 9's interior, was driven toward the moon's surface as planned. But the loss of 1 ship had reduced the array coverage, and 2 adult Varric broke from the group and turned toward the cradle. What happened next lasted 11 minutes and felt much longer. The 2 Varric that came at the cradle were fast, far faster than their size suggested. Nina rotated the ship, keeping the array facing them, and bought time. The UV pressure slowed them, drove them off course, made them circle rather than charge directly. But they were adapting. Each pass brought them a little closer. By the 4th pass, one of them had gotten close enough to rake its hooks across the cradle sensor array on the port side. The array went offline. The UV coverage on that side dropped to 0. The Varric turned and came straight in. Kyle Mercer swung his ship between them and the cradle and fired the UV array at point-blank range. One of the Varric recoiled hard enough that it tumbled end over end into open space, disoriented. Kyle tracked it and kept the array on it while Nina's crew got their backup array running. The second Varric hit Kyle's ship hard, once, twice, and tore a section of the outer hull clean off. The ship held. Kyle held. The second Varric finally broke off when the backup array came online and both ships flooded it simultaneously. Both retreated toward the moon's surface where the rest of the pack was being held, which is where Dante Cruz was waiting. The ground team had landed during the ship engagement, 12 Marines in full containment suits, setting up the ground-level UV emitters that would complete the trap on the surface. The plan was to keep the pack grounded and disoriented long enough for the ship arrays to bring them down. Clean. Contained. Distant. The plan changed when a lone Varric, one of the adults, separated from the pack and moved directly toward the ground team's position. It was not charging. It was hunting. There was a difference, and Dante felt it immediately. A charging Varric was reacting. A hunting Varric was thinking. He told the rest of his team to hold position and maintain the emitters. He took 2 Marines, Carla Voss and Louis Renter, and moved to intercept. The Varric found them first. It came from below, up through a ridge of dark rock, and Carla barely got her UV sidearm up before it was on top of them. The light hit it and it turned, and in that turn Louis drove a lance into its shoulder plating. The charge blew the plating apart but didn't penetrate deep enough. The Varric swatted Louis into the rock face and he didn't get up. Carla held the UV light steady and Dante moved. He went in close, closer than made any rational sense, and waited for the charge. The creature lunged. The half-second window opened. Dante drove the lance into the gap behind the secondary jaw with both hands and threw himself sideways. The detonation was small from a distance. Up close it was enormous. Dante hit the ground and the Varric came down beside him. Not on him, just beside him, close enough that its weight shook the rock beneath his body. It moved twice. Then it stopped. Dante lay still for a moment. Then he got up. Louis Renter had a broken arm and 3 broken ribs. He was alive. Carla had a cut across her face from a fragment of the Varric's plating. She was already back at her emitter station. The death of the ground-level Varric did something to the pack. It spread through them like a current. And then, for the first time in any recorded engagement in Conclave history, the Varric began to move away. Not to regroup. Not to circle. Away. The thermal readings pulled back, further and further, deeper into Sector 9, until the scanners registered nothing but empty space and the slow pulse of those strange energy readings. The Alpha was the last to leave. It was the largest living thing Dante Cruz had ever seen. On the scanner, it was the size of a small destroyer, and it moved with a slow, heavy purpose that was different from the rest of the pack. It did not flee. It retreated. There was a difference, and it was not a comforting one. It looked back, if a thermal signature could look, and then it was gone. Nina Carr stood on the bridge of the battered cradle and looked at the empty scanners for a long time. Then she opened a broadcast channel. She set it to reach Earth Command, the Earth Council, and, very deliberately, every Conclave monitoring station within range. She transmitted the full after-action report. The data. The footage. The body of the dead Varric on the surface of the moon. All of it. She said nothing additional. She let the record speak. The cradle was damaged but flying. One ship was gone. Dozens of crew were injured. Several were dead. The Varric had not been destroyed. Not all of them, not the Alpha, but they had retreated. They had turned away from humans for the first time. Kyle Mercer sat in his command chair with a cup of cold coffee and looked at the hull damage report for his ship. He thought about Owen Garza and Cody Flint and Ray Salter from the Ashford 6 months ago. He thought about Tom Garrett and the people on the ship that went dark. He added their names to the same mental list and held them there. Then he filed his course for home. Dahad had named it was long extinct. The ceiling was open to space through a transparent dome. 17 sections of seating curved around a central floor like the rings of a tree. Each section belonged to a different species, and at full assembly, the sound of 17 different biological forms breathing and shifting and communicating in 17 different ways created a constant, layered noise that you stopped noticing after a while, the way you stopped noticing the hum of a ship's engine. It was silent now. Aaron Briggs noticed that the moment he walked in behind Ambassador Dana Holt. The kind of silence that meant everyone already knew what had happened, and was waiting to find out what would happen next. He was in full dress uniform. So was Dana. On the left side of Aaron's jacket, clipped to the outer pocket flap where a decorative pin would normally sit, was the bent knife. He had asked Dana before the session if she minded. She had looked at it for a moment and said to leave it exactly where it was. They walked to the human delegation's designated position on the central floor. The seating above them was full. All 17 species. Aaron kept his eyes forward, but he could feel the weight of the room, the way you feel a crowd watching you even when you're looking the other way. He did not look at the Velhari section. Not yet. High Speaker Orav Shan opened the session. He was ancient, the oldest living representative in the conclave, from a species that looked like something between a deep-sea creature and a slow, careful intelligence made physical. He moved very little. He spoke very rarely. When he did speak, every room he had ever spoken in had gone quiet immediately, and this one was no different. He said only that the session had been called regarding the events in Sector 9, and that the delegate from the Velhari Nation had requested the floor first. Keth Varrell stood. Aaron looked at him now. He looked different from the meeting on the frontier 3 years ago. Not physically. He was the same height, the same amber eyes, the same bone plating. But something in his posture had shifted. The boredom was gone. What was there instead was harder to name. It was somewhere between anger and the thing that lives underneath anger when anger stops being useful. He spoke for a long time. He was controlled and precise, and his words came through the translator in flat, measured English. He said that humanity had violated quarantine. He said that the unauthorized entry into Sector 9 had represented a reckless disregard for conclave authority and for the safety of every species that shared the region. He said that the Varric were not a trophy to be hunted. He said that provoking them could have consequences that no single species was equipped to manage. He said that humanity's actions had been arrogant, dangerous, and deeply irresponsible. He sat down. The room waited. Dana Holt took one step forward. She did not have notes. She had never used notes in her life, as far as Aaron knew. She stood with her hands loosely at her sides and spoke in the same even tone she had used in every difficult room she had ever stood in. She said that she appreciated the delegates' concerns. She said that 6 months before the Sector 9 operation, a Varric incursion had destroyed a conclave outpost near the border. She said the conclave had sent no military response. She asked the room to hold that fact in mind. She said that 18 months before the operation, humanity had made first contact with the Varric aboard the GES Ashford, had lost 3 crew members, and had come back with biological and behavioral data that no species in conclave history had ever collected. She said that humanity had taken that data, studied it without stopping, and used it to build a plan. She said that 4 ships had entered Sector 9. 1 had been lost, and she named the people on it. She said the names clearly and without rushing, and the room stayed quiet through all of them. She said that despite those losses, humanity had engaged a Varric pack, had driven it back, and had made the first confirmed kill of a Varric in recorded history. She said that in 4,000 years and with 17 species, the conclave's answer to the Varric had been to draw a line and hope they didn't cross it. She said that humanity's answer, in 18 months with 1 species, had been to learn everything possible about what was behind the line and then go meet it. She said she was not standing before the conclave to argue. She was standing before them to present facts. The facts were in the record. The footage was in the record. The body of the Varric on the surface of that moon was in the record. She said that humanity was formally requesting full membership in the Galactic Conclave. Not observer status. Full membership, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. She said she believed that what humanity had demonstrated in Sector 9 constituted sufficient proof of capability, and she left it to the Conclave to decide whether they agreed. She stepped back. The silence lasted long enough that Aaron counted 12 seconds of it. Then High Speaker Orevshan spoke. His voice was slow and low, and it filled the room without effort. He said that in 4,000 years, across 17 species and more conflicts than the archive fully recorded, no member of the Conclave had ever killed a Varric. Not one. He said that the Conclave had tried, in the early centuries, before the quarantine decision was made. He said they had lost 11 fleets. He said that after those losses, the consensus had been that some things were simply beyond what any civilization could achieve, and that accepting that was wisdom, not failure. He paused. He said he was now uncertain that consensus had been correct. He looked at Dana, or at least, the part of his body that functioned as a gaze turned toward her, and asked one question. He asked what it was in human nature that drove them to go toward the thing that frightened them, rather than away from it. Dana was quiet for a moment. It was not the silence of someone searching for an answer. It was the silence of someone deciding how honest to be. Then she said that she didn't think it was one thing. She said that humans had spent their entire history on a planet that was trying, in various ways, to kill them. She said that after long enough, you stopped waiting for the danger to find you and started going to find the danger first, because at least then you were ready. She said it was not always smart. She said sometimes it got people killed. She said it also sometimes meant that the thing the rest of the galaxy had decided was impossible turned out to just be something nobody had tried hard enough yet. She said that she didn't think humanity was braver than any species in the Conclave. She said she thought humanity was simply very bad at giving up. Orevshan was still for a long time. Then he said that he would put the matter to a vote. The vote was not unanimous. Several species abstained. 2 voted against. But the majority held, and when the tally was read, Aaron felt something move in his chest that he didn't have a precise word for. It was not pride, exactly. It was something quieter and more permanent than pride. Dana shook hands with the Conclave representatives in the traditional manner, something she had practiced for 3 weeks to get right, and thanked the High Speaker. Then it was over, and they were walking back out through the corridor. As they neared the exit, Keth Varrell passed them going the other way. He did not speak. He did not look at Dana. His amber eyes moved once to Aaron's side, to the bent knife clipped to the outside of his jacket, and stayed there for a moment. Then he walked on. Aaron watched him go. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. 3 days later, the GES Cradle docked at the Conclave Central Station. It was still patched from the battle, hull plating replaced in mismatched sections, sensor arrays rebuilt in slightly different configurations from the original, the whole ship carrying the specific look of something that had been through something and survived. It was not a clean, ceremonial ship. It was a ship that had been to Sector 9 and come back. It docked without announcement. The station's automated systems assigned it a berth, and it settled into place with the slow, ordinary sounds of a ship finishing a long journey. Outside, visible through the station's observation ports, the Conclave's central hub displayed the flags of its member species along the main approach corridor. 17 flags. They had been 17 flags for a very long time. A station crew member, following new instructions that had been entered into the system just that morning, walked to the panel at the end of the corridor and opened a new slot. The human flag went up. It rose without ceremony, without speech, without any particular drama. It rose the way things that have been earned tend to arrive, not with fanfare, but with a quiet, settled weight that suggested it had always been coming, and had simply taken until now to get here. On the bridge of the cradle, Kyle Mercer watched it through the forward viewport. Paige was beside him. So was Dante Cruz, his arm in a brace, his expression unreadable in the way it always was when he was thinking something he considered too straightforward to need saying. Nobody on the bridge said anything for a while. Then Dante Cruz looked at the flag, looked at his patched-up brace, and said quietly that he supposed they would have to do something about the Alpha eventually. Kyle said yes. He supposed they would. Then he poured 3 cups of terrible coffee and handed them out. And the cradle sat in its berth, scarred and present and absolutely, permanently there.